with Jane Friedman. It's called Navigating Self-Publishing Services. I'm sure if you've attended previous webinars with Jane, you are familiar with her extensive experience guiding authors. But I think it's good to detail some of the most important things that you've done, Jane, because you've done so much. Jane has over 20 years of experience in publishing industry with business strategy for authors and publishers. She is the co-founder of the Hot Sheet, which is a newsletter for authors. She has a new book out, which I want to read to learn and edify myself more, called The Business of Being a Writer, published by the University of Chicago Press. Jane also writes for for Publishers Weekly. She wrote the Authors Guild Guide to E-Publishing, which I highly encourage everyone that's thinking or is currently involved in self-publishing to check out. It's got a lot of very useful information in a very accessible form. In her spare time, Jane writes creative nonfiction and which has been included in various anthologies. So welcome, Jane. Sorry, I'm just having trouble hearing you, but I think...
I muted myself briefly, just so I would...
Okay, there we go. Cut out the ambient noise a little bit.
Yes.
We'll get started with Jane telling us about the self-publishing landscape and what we need to know.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be presenting with Authors Guild again. And I'm going to switch over to a screen share so I can show some slides, and then I'll come back more fully later on for some Q&A. So I'm just going to pop over to my presentation. Here we go. All right. And you can see that okay on your end? All looks good?
Yep, I can.
Okay. Wonderful. All right, so just a quick overview of the material I'll be going through. First, I'm just going to show one slide that I think is very telling about ebook sales data. Then we're going to tackle the ebook publishing and distribution landscape, and then we'll look at print-on-demand publishing and distribution. So first of all, this was a really great graphic that Nielsen released back when Nielsen owned BookScan. This was shared at a Digital Book World conference. And even though it's a little bit out of date, the trends haven't changed much since this graphic was created. So what's important to notice here is that the majority of fiction is getting sold in ebook form. But if you look at the children's and nonfiction market, it's a much lower percentage share of the sales. So the reason that I always show this up front is to make a point for those authors who are considering self-publishing in ebook form. You're not going to see a huge percentage of your sales if you're writing children's work, particularly illustrated children's work like picture books. And also in the nonfiction categories, of course, it's going to depend on which category we're talking about, like cookbook and self-help can operate quite differently. But regardless, if you look at the broad average, nonfiction also sells less in ebook form than compared to fiction. So if you look at the fiction part of the market, that's dominated tremendously by commercial fiction, things like romance, science fiction and fantasy, thriller, suspense, etc. So just to give you a sense of what's selling out there, if you average all of this out across the industry, you'll get that 20 to 30% figure that you often hear cited for traditional publishing when we talk about what's the ebook split versus the print split of sales. Okay, so now with that out of the way, let's talk about the key attributes of the ebook distributors and aggregators out there. First of all, these services don't require any payment upfront. You approach them more or less of your own volition. It's totally at will basis. You can leave as soon as you join up. Like if you put your book up tonight and tomorrow to regret it, you can take it down, and there's no rights really exchanging hands there. It's a terms of service sort of agreement that I'm sure Udair will cover later on. You can update quickly and at very low or usually no cost. So if you change your cover, if you have to change the manuscript in any way to eliminate grammatical errors, you can always go back and do that and have the changes reflected, usually in 24 hours. You control the pricing. And then finally, you're also legally responsible for everything that you're putting in that book, which will get covered later. In the United States, the major ebook retailers include these 4 players, which you're probably familiar with, especially Amazon, of course. Amazon has the lion's share of the market, about 80%. Number 2 right now is the Apple iBooks platform, followed by Barnes & Noble's Nook, and then Kobo. Now, if your books are very popular internationally or in Canada, Kobo becomes really important because they have a significant share of the international market. Something else to realize about these 4 players is that they're, with the exception of Apple, they're all cross-platform. So that means that you don't have to own a Kindle device in order to read a Kindle book. You can read a Kindle book on your iPad or on your Android phone or whatever device you happen to have. Same is true of Kobo and Nook. But if you distribute through Apple iBooks, those books will only be available through Apple OS devices, like an iPhone or an iPad or a desktop. I mentioned that in particular because sometimes people really like the software that comes with Apple, the iBooks author software, but just realize that if you use that software to both produce and distribute your ebook, it's going to be limited to people who use Apple devices. Okay, so now that we know who the main retailers are, how do you access those retailers? There are 3 buckets, I would say, when you're looking at the different services. First, you've got what most authors use at some point, which are the device and retail direct services. So this includes Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing, Barnes & Noble Nook, Kobo, and Apple iBooks iTunes system. So when you're working directly with the retailers in this way, you get the highest royalties and typically the best merchandising opportunities because you're working directly with them. So what you'll often find is that people tend to use Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing, even though there are lots of distributors that reach Amazon Kindle. Then there's another layer of distributors, which can help decrease the administration time of, uploading your book to 4 or 5 different retailers. So in exchange for the convenience, they take about 10% of your net sales. And again, there are no fees here. The 2 biggest distributors in the United States are Smashwords and Draft2Digital. And then if you're international or looking to reach more international markets, PublishDrive and StreetLib are the 2 major players, but they also have operations in the US. So the really nice thing about all of these services that I've mentioned, whether it's Kindle Direct or Smashwords or Kobo, all of them, they're all run on a non-exclusive basis, meaning that you can kind of cherry pick or mix and match the services that you want to use just to reach just the right selection of outlets that are important to you. Although I will talk in just a minute about the Amazon exclusive move and if it's something that you should take advantage of. And then finally, as I mentioned just a bit earlier, there are some services out there that help you create the ebook from scratch. So far, everything I've talked about, these are services that will distribute your ebook files, but they don't necessarily help you create the ebook files in the first place. But there are services that will help you with the creation as well. Pressbooks is one such service, and then, as I mentioned, iBooks Author. So most authors are not using these tools unless they have books that are highly illustrated or some other special consideration that would require you to start the book from scratch. All right, so let me talk about each specific retailer, starting with Amazon, since they are selling the most ebooks in the US. They pay 70% of whatever you price the book at, as long as you're pricing within their preferred range, which is $2.99 to $9.99. And then they pay 35% on everything else. So if you price lower than $2.99 or above $9.99, your royalty gets cut in half. Now, something to realize about that 70% royalty option, it looks really good, but in reality, it's a little bit less than that because they hit you with something called a delivery fee, which let's not go into detail about what exactly the delivery fee is and if it's justified, but essentially it's based on the size of the ebook file. So you're going to see your percentage there drop a few, like say maybe it's only 65%, but it could dip below 60% if you have an ebook that is really long or has lots of high quality images in it. So that's just something to be aware of. Now, Amazon does have an exclusivity program where if you pledge to make your ebook exclusive with them, they will give you some benefits. So this exclusivity is required for 90 days and it automatically renews, but you can drop off at any time after any 90-day period. If you enroll in KDP Select, then your ebook will automatically go into what's known as the Kindle Unlimited program. That's their ebook subscription service that costs consumers $10 a month. It's like a all-you-can-eat buffet of ebooks. And they also give you the advantage, the marketing advantage of making your ebook available for free for 5 days out of the 90 that you're enrolled. Other ebook platforms allow you to make your ebook free at any time. Amazon's the only one that doesn't. And so if you want the ability to make the ebook available for free, typically you need to be enrolled in this program, although there are some workarounds. We won't be able to get to those technicalities in this session, but generally, if you're playing by their rules, your book can only be free if you're in this select. So let me talk a moment about Kindle Unlimited. You do get paid for the activity there. So if someone borrows your ebook as a Kindle Unlimited subscriber and they start reading, you're going to get paid based on a per page basis. That payment right now, it varies between about a little less than ½ cent to about ½ cent per page. So if you're enrolled in this program, it does help increase your Amazon ranking and thus your visibility. So very often in the self-publishing community, it's seen as particularly important and strategic for very new authors who don't necessarily have a following or a brand or any kind of established audience. For more established authors, they typically shy away from making their books exclusive just in this program because they would like to make their ebook available to everyone across all retailers and go wide. So you'll find that there are two strategies that tend to emerge in ebook distribution and marketing, either the KU Amazon exclusive strategy or the going wide strategy. So if you are exclusive to Amazon, you'll tend to be focused on the algorithms, on boosting your rank, on pricing low, doing free runs of the book, and pushing that through promotions and advertising. If you're going wide, then you're probably more focused on long-term readership development. You're invested in your website, building your email newsletter list, and accepting perhaps lower Amazon sales. But of course, all of this varies greatly from author to author, book to book, depending on what genre you're working in, how big your backlist is, and all sorts of other variables. My gut instinct is for anyone who's a member of the Authors Guild, who's been in the business for a while, who has a sizable backlist, you're probably going to want to go wide rather than go exclusive with Amazon. But if you happen to be an Authors Guild member who's very new, you've only got a book out maybe, then an exclusivity for 90 days as a trial might be an interesting experiment. Okay, moving away from Amazon, let's look at Barnes & Noble Nook. They pay in a very similar way to Amazon, just a little less favorably. They pay at 65% rather than 70%. And then they pay 40% on anything outside of that price range, and you can set your price to free. With the Apple iBookstore, even though this is the #2 player right now in the US, it's typically a little bit more difficult to get your ebooks available there directly because it uses this iTunes interface, which is not the greatest. But you do have two methods of distributing to Apple iBooks directly. One is to use the iTunes portal. The other way is to use that iBooks author software that I mentioned, but it does limit that book to iBookstore distribution. Apple will pay you 70% regardless of the price that you set, and then you can also set your price to free. With Kobo, they have the most favorable royalties. They pay 70% on everything $2.99 and above. So 70% even if you go beyond the $10 mark. And then they pay 45% if you price below $2.99, and you can set your price to free. So you can see that they're trying to make it very desirable for you to be selling through Kobo. And in fact, many self-publishing authors really like selling bundles and collections through Kobo because they retain that 70% royalty at the higher price point. So just to give you a really quick breakdown of your cut of the royalties, this graph kind of encapsulates who's paying most favorably at what price point. So you can see the Apple iBooks flat 70% starts to look really good. And since they're the number 2 player, that's very good for authors. And you'll notice that Amazon looks least favorable pretty much across the board compared to the others. Now, you may decide that you would like to use an aggregator like Smashwords or Draft2Digital so that you don't have to go to each one of those retailers and upload your book every single time. And then if you ever change the book in the future, like the cover, the description, the pricing, if you've uploaded to 4 different retailers, then you have to go to 4 different retailers and make that change. So to reduce that administrative burden, you can use a distributor like Smashwords or Draft2Digital. And they're very similar in what they do and in the percentage that they take. I would say the biggest difference between the two is that Smashwords also acts as a retail front. So you can actually sell your books through the Smashwords site. They have a couponing system. And also because Smashwords has been around the longest, they tend to have the fullest, widest, most extensive distribution, particularly to the library market. Draft2Digital, because it hasn't been around quite as long, doesn't have as many tendrils out into the market, but they do cover the most important places that your ebook should be found. And they are perceived to have better customer service than Smashwords and a better word to ePub conversion if that's important to you. If you were to ask a professional self-publishing author what they use, you will probably find that they are handling the Kindle Direct Publishing distribution themselves through their own KDP account, and then they're also handling the Apple iBooks distribution themselves because it's the number 2 player. Then often they're supplementing and reaching the rest of the market using Draft2Digital. So as I said, these services are non-exclusive, so it's possible to use them in combination with each other without stepping on anyone's toes. If you're working on a full color or illustrated book, like a children's picture book, you're going to take a slightly different path. So there are special programs that help you put together these ebooks because they have to be fixed in their layout. So far, we've really been talking about methods of producing and distributing ebooks that are reflowable text, like a novel or a memoir or other text-driven narratives. But once you get into books that need to have a fixed layout, meaning the illustrations don't move and the pages have a very particular design, then there's a different set of tools that come into play. So there's Kindle Kids Book Creator for children's books and illustrated picture books. There's a competitor to that called Book Creator for iPad that does much the same thing. I mentioned iBooks Author already, and then there's a service called Blurb that does great with adult illustrated books, and they can distribute it to Amazon and to Apple. Now, a quick note on ISBNs. If you are bringing back a backlist book, if you're republishing something that's already been out from a traditional publisher, you do need to get a new ISBN, and you'll need one for your print edition and for your ebook edition at minimum. So ISBNs aren't cheap. For 10, I think the price has increased from $250, so that should actually say something. I think like $280 might be closer to what it costs now. But you buy these from the US agency known as Bowker, and you can go to myidentifiers.com to make that purchase. Now, there are some agents who will help you with this process, and they may use, in fact, their own distributors that I haven't mentioned. Whether or not you should use an agent is a pretty personal decision, and it should be a discussion you have with them. But the one question to ask them is what percentage they take and for how long, and what happens if you want to walk away from that arrangement. I think it can be a little bit tricky when you want to retain control and maybe do something that your agent doesn't agree with when they're holding the keys to these distribution accounts. So just proceed with caution and try to have a very transparent, clear conversation about who owns what if they're assisting you with this process. All right, so far I've skirted around the issue of how you create an ebook file. The ePub file format is the industry standard for ebooks, and it will produce the best results if you're uploading an ePub file to all of these services that I just mentioned. So if you take your Word document, let's assume you have a Word document to start with. How do you get it into ePub? Well, there are many conversion services out there that will do this for you, including the retailers I just mentioned. You upload the Word file, and then they convert it, or sometimes meat grind it, into an ePub. And whether you get something tasty or pretty disgusting is going to be based a lot on what that Word file looks like to begin with. So what happens is these retailers offer very precise guidelines about how to unformat your Word document so that it will convert more cleanly into an ebook file. And this can be a process that you have to go back through several times, if not like more than a dozen times, in order to get the best possible clean conversion. And that can be a little frustrating for people. What is ideal is if you're actually working in the native ePub file itself and actually formatting it as an ePub rather than trying to get Word to do what you want so that it converts cleanly. So if you want to try and work more with the native ePub file, you have a few options. The easy options are to use Apple Pages, which can export to ePub and is a little bit better than, I think, than Word in dealing with ePub. You can use the software, which does cost money, called Vellum, which most self-publishing authors love this service, although the drawback is that it's only for Mac users. So if you use a PC, you're out of luck. There's also Pressbooks, which I mentioned earlier, that helps you create ebooks from scratch. You can copy and paste your ebook into Pressbooks. It's like a WordPress interface, and sometimes that's a very comfortable way for people already familiar with WordPress to get an ebook started. If you're a little more technically inclined, if you don't mind learning a new software, you can try Scrivener, especially if you already use it. Juto, which is a software that costs money, but it's a very it's geared specifically toward producing ebook and Mobi files. There's also Calibre, and then Sigil, which is an open source ebook or ePub software, which I've used all of these to create ebooks, and I think my favorite one is probably Sigil, and it's free, and I think it's probably the least intimidating of the ones on the right-hand side of the screen here. So to kind of recap that, if you're comfortable with technology, you might use something like Scrivener or Apple Pages to get your ePub file started, and then you fine-tune that file using an ePub editor like Sigil or Calibre. If you're not so comfortable with technology, I'd look at purchasing Vellum if you're a Mac user. You could hire an independent service to do this, take away the headache. ebookpartnership.com is a great service. They have a lot of experience with this. You could upload your Word document to draft to digital, which probably has the best quality conversion, and then let it convert to ePub, and then you can download the ePub file and possibly make changes using an editor like Sigil, or just keep going back through the draft to digital ePub, do that little game and until you get something that looks quality. And then finally, the last resource I'll mention is if you're familiar with Reedsy, they have a cloud-based manuscript editor and composing system. So if you go there and paste in your book, it will generate an ePub out of that that's pretty good looking. So let's segue into print-based self-publishing. There are several very cheap ways to get a printer-ready PDF file. One of the cheapest and most direct ways is to go back to that draft to digital ePub conversion tool that I mentioned, because it will also at the same time output a PDF file that's printer ready and is usable with CreateSpace, which I'll explain in a moment what that service is. So you can try that, although you are limited in what it will look like you have to use one of their templates and there's not a whole lot of customization options. But if you need a quick and dirty PDF, it'll do the job. You could also use the KDP print beta feature. So if you're already using Amazon KDP to make your ebook available, they have an add-on service that allows you to quickly generate a print PDF. Again, Reedsy, similar to producing an ePub file, can also produce a PDF. And then if you want a more of a polished touch, Joel Friedlander, the book designer, has a great series of book templates. There are probably three 3 dozen different templates that you can buy. They cost less than $100, and they do the job great, and it's very little technical headache involved. So the services for print self-publishing, print on demand, the 2 biggies in the US are CreateSpace, which is an Amazon company, and then Ingram SPARC, which you may be familiar with because Ingram is the biggest book distributor probably in the world, I think, but definitely in the US. So once you have your printer-ready PDF files, you're set to use either of these services. And what I recommend is that you use both, that you upload your files to Amazon's CreateSpace in order to sell through Amazon, and then you use Ingram SPARC to sell to everyone who's not Amazon. And the reason for this is to maximize your distribution and your profits. So what happens when you distribute through CreateSpace, for every copy that's sold through Amazon, you get a really nice cut. This is just an example of what you might receive in your pocket if you were selling, let's say, a $15 paperback. So there would be a unit cost to that book, and then you would get 60% of whatever retail price you set after the unit cost is deducted and after Amazon takes its share. So the earnings drop, of course, if it's sold outside of Amazon, but I recommend you use CreateSpace. You limit their distribution to just Amazon outlets. And then you use Ingram SPARC to sell to the rest of the book industry, so your Barnes and Nobles and independent bookstores of the world. And all of the bookstores of the world who aren't Amazon would much prefer to order through Ingram SPARC because they do not want to order from their competitor Amazon. And they also want to have a discount that matches what they expect. And you can only offer an industry standard discount through Ingram SPARC. You can't really do that through CreateSpace. If you'd like to find professional assistance to help you with any aspect of this process, whether it's editing, design, print, and ebook formatting, the whole 9 yards, I do have specific resources listed at my website at janefriedman.com/resources. You can also look at the marketplaces Readsy and BiblioCrunch for professional help. And then if you also have any thought about using one of the big service companies to help you, an example would be like Girl Friday Productions or Matador in the UK. You can go to the Independent Publishing Magazine. They do reviews of these really they're the high-priced packaging services in a sense. They offer reviews of all of these types of assisted publishing services and try to help you avoid the bad ones. So that's a really good resource if you're looking at trying to get more help and not do it so much on your own. So the big question here, now that I've wrapped up how to handle this from a technical production level, is once you get it out there, is anyone going to know that it exists? And I just want to briefly touch on that before I hand it over to Adair. The biggest factors impacting sales are going to be just your existing awareness with a readership, brand awareness, how many titles you have out in the market, if you've written a decent book description, your marketing copy. Think about your back cover copy and the stuff that appears on Amazon. Is it compelling? And then really good metadata at Amazon in terms of putting the right category on the book, using the right keywords. Your pricing will affect your visibility, and you need to be thinking about ebook pricing that's pretty friendly. Friendly would be somewhere between $2.99 and $5.99. And then a book cover, of course, that matches your genre and the audience's expectations. Now, all of this assumes a quality book, but these are the factors that you'll see self-publishing authors talk about ad nauseum at Facebook groups and discussion boards about how to optimize titles, covers, book descriptions, pricing, and so on. And another thing you'll find a lot of discussion surrounding email newsletters that focus on ebook promotions. So this is inevitably something that you'll probably be thinking about if you're working on your own, trying to get a BookBub featured deal, for instance, on your ebook. There's also written word media that does competing services, very similar to BookBub, that are a little more targeted. Open Road Media, founded by the other Jane Friedman in publishing, also offers email newsletter promotion to all authors, not just their own authors that they have in-house. And then if you want to get a full sense of the universe of email newsletters that promote ebooks, go to the Readsy database. Just go to readsy.com, look for email newsletter promotion services, and you'll find a database there that you can sort by genre and how hard it is to get in and get featured. So again, inevitably, if you self-publish your ebook, you're going to be thinking about how do I get anyone to see that it exists, and often running a price promotion or a giveaway is part of that process. You'll probably also think about Facebook and Amazon advertising, but before you jump into that pool, realize that even people who are experienced at it fail, and it takes a real stomach for that failure and iteration and improvement over a long period of time. It usually requires A/B testing, quick tests and experiments to figure out what works. And if you are interested in Amazon ads in particular, or Facebook ads, I would recommend looking at Mark Dawson's courses available online. Look at Brian Meek's book. He tackles Facebook ads. So make sure, in other words, to educate yourself before you invest in any advertising on social media or at Amazon. Okay, if you want more marketing resources, I have a really significant list at my website. If you go to bit.ly/epub-jf, you'll come up with the list of all the different ways that you can market and promote your self-published work. So now I'm going to hand it over. I'm going to stop my screen share here.
Thank you, Jane. That was very helpful especially for me too. I haven't self-published a book or published a book, just emails mostly. But to learn about the back end mechanics and how much goes into it is just fascinating. And because at our end, we do see some service provider agreements, and we see hybrid publishing agreements, which is kind of another whole world. Compared to traditional publishing, the business, it's its own universe.
Yes.
So thank you for enlightening us on that. So I think that there are a few things from the legal point of view when it comes to self-publishing, and Jane mentioned a few of them. I think I'll begin with the most important, perhaps, of being legally responsible for all of your actions when you're a self-published author. So when you have a publisher, oftentimes you may have some assistance, some protection, in the sense that they might put you on their insurance, a media liability insurance, or they may agree to indemnifying, which is very rare. Most of the times what an author does when they are publishing with a traditional publisher is they promise to indemnify the publisher for any sort of copyright infringement actions that might come up. But the publisher may take action on behalf of the author if the author's work is infringed. So all of that, the legal frontier is open to the self-published author, and they have to sort of understand a little bit. One of the most important things I think that for any self-published author is to understand that you in most jurisdictions you cannot bring a lawsuit for copyright infringement unless you have registered your copyright with the Copyright Office. So that is a very important thing. Jane, would you agree that we should all register?
Yes, please register your work.
If you register it within 3 months of publication, there are other benefits. One of the biggest benefits is that of statutory damages, which can range from $750 to I believe $150,000, depending on a number of factors that the courts will look at when they hear a copyright infringement claim. But you won't have a chance at any of that unless you have registered with the Copyright Office, and we assist authors with understanding the registration process all the time. So if you're thinking about registering your copyright, you can send us an email at staff@authorskill.org, call us. The Copyright Office itself has copyright consultants that are experienced in sort of the minutia of registration. That is also a very technical process, but They are a great resource. If you're just sort of like an author and want to understand more about copyright, the Copyright Office also has circulars that break down the process and its legal implications pretty clearly. So all those resources are out there, and of course, you know, we would like to think that we can kind of be a hub. And if you have any questions, you can come to us, and then we'll take care of it from there. And also related to copyright, there is using someone else's work. There's some confusion about what you can and cannot use without getting permission. And I think one of the things that for self-published authors that I see when I engage with members and get queries from them is sometimes there's a confusion about who owns the book cover and who owns the cover photograph. So you you might go and get a photographer to take a very nice picture of the Empire State Building, and that's, you want to use that as a cover, and you do create your own ebook and put that image as the cover, but you haven't asked for the right. Well, you may have licensed the rights. If you have licensed the rights, it's a different thing. But what for self-published authors, because it's your book, what's ideal is that that photo should be a work for hire, which means that you become the owner of the copyright in that photo, as opposed to just having licensed its use for a certain book. What happens is, if you just license it and you decide to put the book out of print and then reproduce it, then you'll have to get permission again. So Jane, is that something that you encounter in your experience, authors sort of figuring out cover design in?
Yes, I think it's really important to talk with your designer about where they're getting their images from and what license agreements they have in place or don't. And I also run into authors who want to know if they can use an old cover that used to appear on a previously published edition, and almost always the answer is no, although there may be some exceptions. So yeah, it's really important to have a upfront conversation with the designer about what you can pay and what sort of legal agreement you're getting into.
That's a very good point, because you want to be sure that the image that the designer is providing you is also licensed properly and is legal to do so. And James, very good point, especially for a lot of authors whose books have gone out of print and rights reverted, and they decide to sort of take the self-publishing route afterwards. 9 times out of 10, the publisher is the owner of the cover image and all of the illustrations and typesetting that, besides your manuscript, they include in that book. So oftentimes publishers will maybe negotiate, and you can purchase those images, or with especially some of the newer service providers, I've noticed that the contracts contain a clause where they say, if you have the option to purchase for $150 or $200 the work product that we create for your book. So just another thing to keep in mind when you're as you're thinking about cover design and sort of the more minor things, which can end up becoming major things. Let's see. Another legal issue that besides cover design and permissions, if you're quoting someone else's work, then we get into this territory of fair use, which is a very confusing area itself. Sometimes we hear people sometimes have a misperception that if they quote a certain number of words, if they're under that limit, then it's fair use, and it's not. But actually, fair use is a little more nuanced than that. It's a 4-part test, and it kind of depends on what you're using. So if you're using if you're quoting 4 stanzas from a 5-stanza poem, then it's probably not fair use, because you're using a lot of it. But if you're quoting a paragraph from a 500-page novel, then it might be fair use. So what we recommend always is to be on, especially as a self-published author that does not have that buffer of the publisher sort of protecting you, is to get permission if at all possible. It's you can sleep easy at night without worrying about anyone sort of knocking on your door, and claiming copyright infringement. I want to switch a little bit to service provider agreements, and maybe Jane here I could sort of ask for your feedback a little bit more. We've seen quite a few of them. From my experience, I think one of the most important things to realize in this situation is not to transfer copyright if you're, if it's especially if it's just a distributor or sort of like a publisher that's not really doing much. They're making the book available, to only give them a very limited right to sell the book. And Jane, do you have anything before? Because I wanted to move a little bit after that to hybrid publishing, but I wanted to see if you have any sort of comments on the types of service providers there are out there, because oftentimes it's hard to distinguish what who's
yes.
who.
Yes, it can be very difficult.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I feel like things have improved a little bit in the last couple years. Certainly around 2012 to 2016, that window, it felt like there were service agreements that were really not good that people were getting into. I think whenever you're sent like a publishing contract from someone who really ought to be a distributor, I think that's a red flag. So all of the services, in other words, that I talked about today, act as distributors. And so there's just like a terms of use it's kind of a take it or leave it proposition. Like, you're not going to negotiate with Amazon change their terms for KDP.
Yeah.
But certainly whenever someone's sending you a contract to sign, I think that's when a little light should go off. Oh, is this exactly what I thought it was going to be? And then you have to read it really closely, as you said, to make sure there's no exchange of like copyright or any kind of grant of rights that would limit your ability to do something with that work in the future.
Absolutely, because I've seen some sort of fairly awful agreements where it's essentially a distributor, but they're asking for they're saying we'll pay you 50% on your subsidiary rights, and it's like, well, you actually, why are you even asking for these rights? That's not your job. So it's because you are as a self-published author, you're in this like entrepreneurial role. So it's important to kind of it's maybe a little more taxing, and you have to keep on top of the business a little bit. But it's very important to know what's out there. Definitely, even with we've seen some good hybrid publishing agreements, very fair, but then there's also some new ones that come out where the hybrid publisher oftentimes will ask for dramatic rights, and that's if you're actually paying the publisher to publish the book, it's probably very important to reserve as many rights as you can for yourself, and only give them the right to print, produce, and sell the book. Jane, I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with hybrid contracts, it gets really, really difficult to advise authors because each hybrid is so different. Fortunately, there was a list of criteria put out by the Independent Book Publishers Association, which I thought was very well done. That kind of gives you a checklist to go by to see, well, does the hybrid do A? Does it do B? And so that can help direct you to not choose a really bad one.
Absolutely.
Like you said, there's like no reason for most of these companies to have their hands on dramatic rights, like film, TV, commercial, merchandising, amusement park. Like they have no business with having that.
Right. And imagine, especially with, a lot of genre writing that is becoming more digital. Oftentimes I feel like those books have characters that can actually become derivative.
Exactly.
So you want to be extra careful if you have a very, very cute bunny in your book that's going to suddenly, capture everyone's imagination. then you want to keep the bunny for yourself.
Yes.
But that's one of the really big concerns out there. And yes, the IBPA checklist is excellent. We have our own checklist too, very similar. And so we share it with authors that are interested in exploring that. And of course, Jane, the ebook, the Authors Guild Guide to E-Publishing has covers all of these different types of publishers and has a pretty, which I found to be a very informative section on hybrid publishing. So those resources are out there. We have, I think we have, okay, so we have about 4 minutes before we'll turn to Q&A. So the last thing I wanted to touch on is combating internet piracy, and it's something, I don't know how many attendees attended last week's webinar, which with Sarina Bowen, a self-published author, and we talked about novel ways of sort of thinking about piracy and techniques to maybe protect yourself a little bit more from this scourge almost. And as a self-published author, you don't have the publisher you don't have the buffer of the publisher, even though the way the industry is changing, publishers themselves are finding themselves in a situation where they have limited resources to go after pirates. So it's increasingly, the burden has been shifting on the author to track down and then target piracy. There are a few things we covered a lot of things in more detail in previous week's webinar, which is archived. If you're more interested, you can watch that. But Jane, I wanted to ask you about DRM and watermarking from like an industry perspective. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. With DRM, almost every retailer, like including Amazon, will ask you if you want to apply DRM to your ebook. And I find it a pretty personal decision, but generally, if you listen to the advice from the retailers themselves, they usually recommend that authors do not apply DRM because it's seen as reader unfriendly, meaning that you're locking that reader into reading that ebook only from that retailer forever and ever or on that device. So they can't, if they decide to switch from Kindle to Nook or Kobo, you're really making it hard for them to do that without breaking the law, basically. But every author has different concerns, or every situation's different. For like, I've self-published a book before and I didn't apply the DRM, and I don't feel like it's not been a bad thing at all. I think don't feel like I've suffered any ill effects from that. So you do get to make that choice through almost every single distributor on the ebook. And again, if you want to be reader friendly, I would not apply the DRM, but there can be good reasons to do so anyway. Just understand that it's very easy for anyone to Google break the DRM and get a step-by-step process of how to do it. So it only protects you up until a point.
No, I was just going to say it is interesting because it's sort of no one really takes DRM seriously, as a serious antidote to piracy. But like Jane said, a lot of retailers will maybe require that. You're so right. I was doing some research on DRM, and I found all of these readers forums where people were it was like a very visceral antagonism towards DRM.
Yes.
And a very principled stand against, like, no, I will not read anything that has ever been DRM protected. So
right, exactly.
Sorry, go ahead, Jane.
I was just going to say I forgot about the watermarking issue. I see watermarking used very frequently on PDFs to keep people honest. Mm-hmm. So especially if you're selling PDFs direct off your site, which is common in kind of the information product business, like if you're a business thought leader or something. There are services out there like eJunkie is one, there's so many, but almost all of them allow for some sort of watermarking system. So where the person's information is watermarked on the PDF, like sensitive information. So it allows, like if people share it in a way that's not appropriate, you can easily figure out who it is.
Right.
So I think most people accept that as being kind of, I guess it's called a friendly DRM system. So there's that also for other types of sales.
That's and especially for self-published authors, because my impression is that self-published authors are so much closer, I guess, in a way to their reader community, and the reader community is just as passionate. So that's a very different dynamic where you don't want to, maybe not want to use DRM, which everyone hates.
Right.
Yes, I would also, on internet piracy, I would highly, sort of encourage everyone to check out our webinar from last week, Serena talked about kind of this allowing phishing sites to exist because they can obscure the real pirate sites. So, you know, if you made the distinction between phishing sites and pirate sites. I think that about covers it for us. Jane, did you have anything that you wanted to add before we move on to the Q&As?
No, I don't think so. I was just checking the Q&A box, and there
are no questions.
Yeah, we've done such a good job. If there aren't any questions yet.
But if you don't mind, I can ask you. I can ask you some questions because I'm very curious. So, you know, from your perspective, we talked a little bit about discounts to, you know, when you sign up with Ingram. There are some sort of customary discounts in the industry. Is that something that a distributor would sort of you know, require you to do beforehand in a contract, or is this more informal?
Sure. Yeah. So if you're working with Ingram SPARC specifically, you have total control over the discount that you set. And normally what you want to do is offer the 55% discount option through Ingram SPARC. So that way booksellers get the discount they need to make the sale or make it attractive to them so that they'll be encouraged to stock the book. So what happens is Ingram takes 15% and that leaves the bookseller with a 40% discount off the retail that you've set. So you can make the discount less, like you can do a short discount. And a lot of self-publishing authors do the short discount because they just don't like giving up so much to the bookseller. But if you want to see a really strong bookstore presence, or if there's that potential, I should say, then I would say go for the 55%. With other, like if you work with other outfits, let's say you work with a hybrid like Greenleaf, they're going to have control over that, and you don't really have any say over what sort of their discount schedule is, and that discount schedule may differ based on each account. Mm-hmm. So I think Ingram SPARC is really the only place I know of where you get to decide as the publisher what you're going to offer. The other thing that comes into play here that becomes quite important through Ingram is that they allow you to accept returns. You don't have to, but again, that's a very bookstore friendly thing to do, is to allow your book to be returnable. Now, keep in mind, this is still a print-on-demand sort of system, so they still have to pay for the book up front before it's going to be shipped to them, but once it's there, there's still the ability for them to return it and get a full refund. And so then you have to tell Ingram, okay, yes, I'm allowing that, and you have to tell them if you want the book to be shipped back to you at your expense, because Ingram will not store it for you, or do you want it destroyed? So those are some difficult questions to answer. And as someone who's allowed for returns, I've had like a box of 50 books end up on my doorstep that I didn't particularly want, because I thought, surely, you know, I don't want them destroyed. I'll find a way to sell them. But once you're a few years into a book's life, you may not necessarily want to be dealing with copies around the house. So the other piece of good news on that is, with Ingram, you can determine whether or not you allow returns on territory. So like you can say yes to returns in the US, but no to returns in the UK. And of course, you can also customize the pricing in all of those territories as well, et cetera. But yeah, there's a lot of decisions as a publisher that enter the picture when you work with someplace like Ingram. If you work strictly with CreateSpace, the Amazon distributor, then they basically make all of those decisions for you. No returns, 40% discount, if that, it might be less. And that, like, so it's like a take it or leave it. You don't get to fiddle around.
Right, that's my impression. You just have to go with what they say. So you know, Jane, I could ask you so many other questions, but I think we have some new ones coming in here. There's a request. Please recommend some hybrid publishers. I don't know. There's so many of them, and
I can recommend a handful. So one of the person who's asking the question mentions it's a memoir, and because it's a memoir, one particular hybrid comes to mind. She Writes Press. Which does great work, and I think their fees are reasonable. They're very transparent and upfront. So that's one that I would look at. Greenleaf is another that I just mentioned. They typically work with business and nonfiction books. That's, I think, where their strength lies, but they do any category. But you have to realize that the fees can get really expensive.
For Greenleaf, I've seen some pretty exorbitant fees, but yeah, she writes is very, very.
Another interesting hybrid is InkShares, which is it's a crowdfunding model. So you have to raise a certain amount of money before they then publish your book. But at that point, they tend to act like any other traditional publisher would. So those are a few. If you wanted to look at the independent publishing magazine reviews, sometimes they're covering publishers that I would consider kind of like a hybrid. But to me, there aren't that many true hybrids around. I think a lot of them are just basically self-publishing services that are dressed up a little.
Yeah. Again, it's so confusing. Are they a distributor? How much production do they do? How much marketing do they do? And maybe, we'll have we could have a series of webinars, like trying to hash out some of these issues. Jane, could you, there was someone that wanted that bit.ly link again, if you could navigate, or you could just, I think it might.
I answered that one by text, but just to repeat it for those listening, it's a bit.ly link. So it's bit.ly/epub -J F. And if you didn't catch that, you can just contact me through my website and I'd be happy to share it with you.
Wonderful. Besides social media, what's another option for marketing a self-published book?
I think the number one way to market self-published books is through the ebook promotion discount services I mentioned. So the BookBubs of the world. Those are always like the number one stop for most people. And then the number two is often starting some sort of advertising through Facebook or Amazon. I actually don't think social media is a great way. Just organically, social media doesn't tend to lead to many book sales unless you've already got a really substantial following. If you do, then typically what you'll find with Facebook is giveaways and contests tend to push a lot of interest and traffic and sharing, but you have to do it from a business page. You can't just run a contest or a giveaway from your personal profile, or you'll get in trouble. Other methods are, it depends on how many books you've got out there. So like, for instance, let's say you're writing a series. If you make the first book in the series available for free, either indefinitely or for a short period of time, you tend to see a really nice conversion into the rest of the series if people enjoyed the first book. So that's a tried and true method for novelists.
Excellent. And I'm just I think there was a follow-up to the marketing self-pub books. BookPub is one. Was there another service that
Yeah, there's a company called Written Word Media that operates several of these services. And then if you want to find a database of them, just go to readsy.com and they have like this really great database that you can search of the discount services.
Perfect. I'll respond to that here. Okay. And any particular ePub editing platform that you would recommend that handles multimedia better than others?
iBooks Author wins hands down for that. The only other option would probably be hiring someone to help you do it on a custom basis. So the technical term for this is ePub 3. So that's the technical format that supports multimedia. So if you go to some place like a ebook formatter or production service, you're going to be asking them for ePub 3 formatting for your ebook if you don't do it on your own.
Excellent. Thank you, Jane. And I think this last one, I use the internet a lot for researching visuals. I've been told all visuals have a code to find their origin site and a site that can find these. I'm not sure if there's an. I mean, unless there's something embedded in the kind of metadata of the file, but I don't think as a.
Well, I know what I do if I'm trying to find an image source. Like if I have the image, but I have no idea where it came from, I do a Google search by image.
Yeah. So that's a great way to do it. You can right click on the image and in the drop-down menu, you'll see search for image on Google, and that's the Google image reverse image search.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I believe I think we're right on time, Jane. Thank you so much. Yeah, maybe I'll follow up. And there's so much that I learned today, but also so many questions that come up when I see contracts in a legal department sees some of the newer forms of contracts. So
yeah.
Thank you. Have a good day, Jane.
Thanks so much, Umair.
Thanks everyone for watching. Bye bye.
Bye bye.